in Nuremberg. They're having getting set up for a little fair or market. I'm guessing this is for the Oktoberfest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
One important group for Nuremberg, the craftsmen. Nuremberg did not have a lot of raw materials in former times, so it was a necessity to import raw materials, especially metals, and the group of craftsmen, they produced something out of it, like the tanners, for example, or metal workers, and they produced bowls, funnels. Wire production was invented in Nuremberg around 1300, so very early, and the wire was used for chain mails, for example. That was an important good for the export in medieval times. Knives, swords, armors are some more examples for these metal products. So metal production was an important thing for the wealth that Nuremberg developed, because a second group of persons, the merchants, they exported these metalworks in the known world of the 14th and 15th century, and they became so important that Nuremberg developed to a junction of trade roads in medieval times. So the craftsmen, the merchants, and a third group that became important in a wealthy city were the artists. And one of our most important or most famous artists is Albrecht Dürer. Have you heard of Albrecht Dürer? He was a painter and a copper printer in the late 15th century, so 500 years ago. And he lived in Nuremberg, and he was buried here in the cemetery that we are going to visit in some minutes. And Albrecht Dürer is famous, for example, for the praying hands or the hair. That's an aquarelle painting. And there is a company just to our right that cited these hairs in the red art objects here on the little bridge in our front. And these two hairs, they have funny names. They were called Sit and Flit. And this refers to our energy company, so the name, it fits quite well to energy. Yes, the place where Albrecht Dürer was buried is in the St. John's Cemetery. This area here developed in the course of the 19th century along the first rail tracks that were built along this street in the course of the 19th century. So lots of companies settled down in this area. For example, bicycle companies, Hercules is a name, or Mars. These two company names were connected to bicycle production in the 19th century. Others are or other industries we still have, is medical engineering. There's the company Novartis to our right side. Others were pencil production, for example. So companies like Faber-Castell, Lyra, Schwann-Stabilo and Städtler, They have their research laboratories and their administration sites in Nuremberg even today. Also, lots of production sites have moved to other countries because, yeah, work is cheaper over there than in Germany. But the companies are still here in Nuremberg, and they have still quite a lot of importance. Other employers, Siemens, for example, is a big employer, or MAN company, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and so on. So far to the history of the 19th century. Now we approached to a green part of Nuremberg. That's our little river. It's called Pignitz, and to the right side we can catch a glimpse between the leaves to this little river. It was never navigable, and in the early days of Nuremberg it seemed to be an inconvenient to have this river. But as it was impossible to install water mills, they could develop water power and establish an early industrial production. And yeah, especially metal production I was already talking about. So wire drawing was developed by the help of water power, also hydropower. We are very close to the cemetery. It is the oldest cemetery we have. It was mentioned first in the early 13th century, so more than 800 years ago. And it used to be a cemetery for contagious diseases, for leper, for example. Then, in the course of plague diseases, it was enlarged, and around 1500 the cemeteries in the old town around the churches were closed, and they were transferred to this area where we are now, to this St. John's cemetery that was enlarged enormously around 1500. And it is famous for more than 6,000 lying tombstones, sandstone tombstones, and each of these tombstones bears a bronze plaque that tells about the family, the name, the time the men and women were married, how often they were married, how many children they had, what kind of profession they had, and it is decorated in a very nice way. So the church is old, dates back to the 13th century, was not hit during World War II, and yeah, you see the last roses and the early geraniums. So the flowers of the end summertime. Isn't it beautiful? Yes. Yeah. So it's the place with the most flowers we have. People appreciate to have a grave even today. So it's very yeah, well seen to have a graveyard here. And also Albrecht Dürer is buried here, Veit Stoß, the wood carver, lots of patrician families, the Tucher family, who is famous for beer, Imhoff, for example, Harsdörfer. So the whole cemetery is a kind of who is who here in Nuremberg. Yeah, an old word on the right side, Barockhäusle. It's a coffee today in the backyard. It's one of the oldest styled gardens, Baroque gardens, that became popular during the Baroque period in the late 17th and 18th century. It was a time when rich people in Nuremberg started to build houses like this nice timber frame building here on the right side. It's an old building. They tried to spend the summer month in the outskirts, outside of the city wall, and they established nice Baroque gardens in the back. So the city council or city government was not that happy because of that, and so they forbid to install heating systems to make sure that people come back during the winter months into the city. So a certain kind of politic. Now we are driving to the old town from the northwestern street. In our front, the northwestern gate. So if you have a map of Nuremberg, it's the left top gate around tower that is surrounded by the bastions. The spires in the front belong to St. Sebald's Church. This is one of our two main churches from medieval times. So the left top gate, it's called Neutor, New Gate. To the left side, a nice view to the castle. It's the blue and white Bavarian flag at the top of the roof and the red and white Franconian colors. So we will see the castle a bit later again. Now we drive back into the old town. We cross the big moat. This moat, as always, used to be a dry moat. That's the reason for the size. The wall, see the wall again. Nuremberg is the only big town in Europe with actually 500,000 inhabitants that has still preserved the old medieval city wall. All other cities with city walls are much smaller than Nuremberg is. So this is a real important part of our architecture. So in front of the white building, another view to the Terrace Lane. Small lane with a lot of timber frame buildings that give a nice impression what Nuremberg used to look like until World War II. So the houses were small facades. Timber frame was the typical material for craftsmen. So the cheaper way to construct architecture. As Nuremberg used to be a rich city in former times, most public buildings were built in sandstone. There's only one exception. That is a hospital coming up on our left side. This large timber frame building dates back to the 15th century. It was only used once a week before Easter for the people who had lepra. They were allowed to stay here for 1 week. Today it's later it's used as a wine barn. Today it's a student's home. Yeah, on the left side, the last remains of our first city wall. So this was constructed in the early 14th century, so 600 years ago, and the last part that has survived until today. When the outer wall was finished, here on the right side, this left part was used for a person nobody wanted to meet, the hangman, the city executioner, and so it is called Hangman's Bridge today.